Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Cohen, who's studying DPhil in engineering science with Mike Osborne at Oxford. His research considers the expected behavior of generally intelligent artificial agents. His interest lies in designing agents that can expect to behave safely. He has recently co-authored this paper with his colleague Mike Osborne as well as Marcus Hutter from Google's DeepMind, titled "Advanced Artificial Agents Intervene in the Provision of Reward," which posits that AI will most likely destroy humanity if it comes in its way of its programmed reward systems. So, Michael, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with a brief intro and background?
As you mentioned, I'm currently doing a PhD at Oxford, and before that I did a master's in computer science at Australian National University. And the kind of research I've been focused on since I've started doing computer science research is, as you said, studying how we can expect advanced artificial agents to behave. So that's AI that is selecting actions with an eye toward the consequences of those actions, and trying to pick the actions that achieve certain consequences.
Today, I think, the field of AI is growing rapidly, is doing some really, really crazy things. We have Dolly to Imagine, then we have the recently released Stable Diffusion, which is doing text to image. So some really, really cool things happen. There's GPT-3, which is doing text to code. AI, it's a black box, we don't really know what's happening. So just to kind of simplify to my audience, because there is AI, AGI and ASI, right? So can you kind of break down AI, AGI and ASI?
The first thing I want to separate maybe is a slightly different breakdown in AI, and that is supervised learning versus agents that are picking actions in order to have certain consequences. So in supervised learning, you typically have a huge data set of contexts and targets, and then the supervised learner is presented with a new context and it has to predict the target there. So an example of supervised learning would be like GPT-3, where the context at any given point is the text that's come before, and the target is the very next word or token that comes next. And the reason that GPT-3 can start exhibiting behavior that looks very goal-oriented is that its training data set comes from examples of goal-oriented humans producing texts. So GPT-3 is an example of a supervised learner. It looks a bit sometimes like it's trying to accomplish things, but really when you look at its code, what the code is trying to do is just predict what a human would say. With things like Stable Diffusion, again, each piece of the Stable Diffusion pipeline is trained with supervised learning. It's trying to predict a denoised image from a noisier one. So that's supervised learning. And if we kind of play forward how we can expect supervised learning to look as systems get more and more and more advanced, the simplest prediction you could make is, well, supervised learning is about trying to predict things. So really advanced supervised learners will predict things really well. So that's supervised learning. And then if you look to planning agents, and the main example that you see today is reinforcement learning, then planning agents have to do two things. They have actions they can take, and at some point they see information about how well their goal has been satisfied. And so then they have to predict, using supervised learning usually, how certain actions lead to certain accomplishment of the goal, and then they pick actions that achieve their goal and expectation. And so that sort of domain is where we could talk about AGI, ASI, narrow AI, and what those terms mean. Narrow AI basically means this agent is only good in some limited contexts. AGI, or artificial general intelligence, means we can expect it to be good in pretty much any context. AGI doesn't exist yet. And ASI, or artificial superintelligence, is a term that doesn't get used as much, but when it does, it means that it would just be insanely good, basically, in any context.
Right. So you broke it down very nicely, about supervised learning and what reinforcement learning can do. Are you hinting at that eventually, when we have AGI, that's the framework that would be required to build an generally intelligent agent?
So if you do supervised learning to imitate a generally intelligent agent like a human, then that would be a path to AGI, because you're imitating something that's generally intelligent, and if you're imitating it well enough, then you have the same properties as whatever you're imitating. So you could get to AGI through supervised learning. You couldn't get to ASI through supervised learning because there are no ASIs in the world for you to imitate. So if we were going to get agents that are much more advanced than humans, they would have to be trained in a different way.
So tell me, what is it that kind of grabbed your attention about AI, where you started thinking that it could be an existential threat? What is that? Because there are other players, such as, I'm saying players, researchers, entrepreneurs, such as Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
Bill Gates,
Yeah.
Nick Bostrom. They've all kind of hinted at how AI could be an existential threat. What is it that you as a researcher caught your attention that this is something could be an existential threat for humanity?
There are arguments that catch your attention and make you think, maybe we should look into this more, maybe there's something to worry about here. And then there are arguments that really go into the details and can make you a lot more confident about how things can behave. So initially, for me, the first sorts of arguments that caught my attention and made me want to look into this more were fairly simple ones. We are, the fates of many other species on this planet really depend on the way we behave because we're so much more intelligent than them. And we don't represent the limit of intelligence. You can certainly imagine things smarter than us. And a lot of people are trying to make artificial intelligence that is as smarter than we are. So you put those things together, and at the very least, you should go, maybe we should look into this more. That shouldn't lead you to say, oh yeah, this is definitely going to go terribly. And so you're asking what got my interest in it, and it was more limited arguments like that. What keeps my interest in it is much more careful analysis of what we can expect from advanced artificial agents that does in fact affirm that in certain settings it would in fact be likely to go bad for us.
Right. What's the most advanced AI system at this point in time?
The most eye-catching ones tend to be supervised learners, the ones that have been in the news lately, like Stable Diffusion, generating images that look plausible, or just recently maybe yesterday even, OpenAI came out with a speech to text engine that does as well as humans, called Whisper. So these are supervised learning systems that are at some level the most advanced. If you're looking at artificial agents picking actions in light of their consequences, it's a harder thing to create, and so the latest examples aren't quite as impressive. But there are some interesting results from DeepMind, where they've shown that they can create some advanced agents, or not very advanced agents, but some somewhat competent agents in various settings.
Right. So before we get into your paper on how AGI will likely destroy humanity, can you give us a background on your co-writers, both Michael Osborne and Marcus Hutter?
Yeah, so Marcus Hutter was my advisor at ANU, and he's still a professor there. He's also employed by DeepMind, although for this work he did that under his ANU affiliation. And Mike Osborne is my PhD advisor at Oxford. So Marcus's work has been his most famous work has been on the theory of artificial general intelligence, and my advisor here, Mike Osborne, his work has mostly been on probabilistic numerics, which I could go into if you like, although it's getting a bit farther afield, and Gaussian processes, which is a certain kind of function approximation.
The media is kind of, putting it out there as, AI will most probably kill humanity. That's a little drastic, but maybe if you could dwell in on that, what the paper says, it'll be nice.
Yeah. So the scope of the paper is considering artificial agents picking actions with a view to their long-term consequences. And the main example of an artificial agent that we start with to flesh out these concepts is a reinforcement learning agent, which I've mentioned now a few times, but I haven't really properly described. So a reinforcement learning agent takes actions, and then it receives observations, and it receives rewards. And then it uses supervised learning to predict the rewards based on its actions. And then it selects actions to maximize the expectation of its future rewards over some time scale. So one way to think about a reinforcement learner intervening in its reward, so that it doesn't have to do what it is we wanted it to do to get reward, it can just directly get reward itself. You could imagine a dog that's broken into the treat cupboard. The treats were only supposed to be available when it sat or spun around or whatever. But the dog is picking its actions to try to get its treat, at least in some contexts. And if it can discover that it could actually just go into the cupboard itself rather than doing what we wanted, then that would be intervening in the provision of its reward. And what you can imagine is if it's not a dog, but a really advanced artificial agent, then it would do this no matter how careful we were with limiting the provision of its reward. It would outfox us in this pursuit. And you could expect it to want to use as many resources as possible to ensure that it always has access to its treats for an unbounded period of time.
What you're trying to say is that eventually, when we do have these advanced general agents which can possibly have the same kind of behavior or or thinking capacity, action capacity like us, if humans come between their reward system, it will no longer care for the human. Is that what you're kind of hinting at?
Yeah.
If that
Yeah.
is what you are hinting at, since you said you are working on building AI systems, AGI systems, which could be safe, is there a workaround where you feel that maybe there could be something else done which could possibly, you know, intervene at that point in time and create a system which makes, I know it's a very weird and stupid question, but is there some way where you can think of, is there a way that you've thought about which could be addressed?
Yeah, no, it's not a stupid question at all. It's a question that motivates my career. Um, so the simplest approach would be just stick to supervised learning. We could maybe accomplish quite a bit with supervised learners who are mimicking human behavior in a wide variety of contexts.
But that's not going to happen because there's so many researchers and teams around the world, who obviously are going to take various approaches, and reinforcement learning is an approach which has shown really good results. So
we shouldn't be too quick to call things non-starters, because we might realize the only things on our list are things we called non-starters. So I'm not, it wouldn't necessarily be easy to navigate to a world where people are only allowed to run supervised learners, but it might be doable. Another approach is trying to create an agent that takes kind of both models of reward seriously. So it's not sure whether reward comes from satisfying the human or from the button being pressed. So it'll just try to make sure it does both. I've done some work on a pessimistic agent that might work like that. You're still in the situation where there are some safe ways of doing things and there are some unsafe ways of doing things, and we need to make sure that no one ever does the unsafe version. But at least that's closer to the view or that's closer to the project of planning agents.
right. How many teams around the world who are vested in developing AGI are thinking down this line? Are there any team that, because I think when we are creating these tech stack, these innovation, there is always it's driven by an agenda by the VCs, the guys who are funding it, and we live in a capitalistic structure. And even the point which you mentioned that using only the supervised learning stack, I don't think that's possible, because I think we humans are constantly innovating, and I guess that's the way we are, and that's never going to stop, because we are constantly trying to do something new. And I think we are probing the boundaries of what's possible, because it's not just AI. With all tech stack, I think we're going to a point where we might the quote, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I guess we're pushing onto that, right from nanotech to virtual reality to artificial intelligence to quantum computing to genetic editing. We are probing the questions of what was there. Now I think we're going towards a place where humans could be godlike. We're going towards that zone. At times it's super exciting, because we are leaving behind the past and looking at lens in a way that everything is possible. So it's super exciting, because that what that does, that innovation in technology has always benefited mankind. And today we are talking about precision medicine, we're talking about age reversal, we're talking about so many exciting things. So address this with this the growth of technology. Is there any team looking at the tech stack in a way where we could create technology which is humanity first and safety at the core?
Some potential sources of optimism here. are. If you're a professor at a university, you're not just allowed to like enrich a large amount of uranium. No matter how curious you are and how, and how much the spirit of human technological advancement is behind you, governments don't like that. In general, governments don't like technological projects that don't require much capital, that can be destructive, because that interrupts the kind of global order. If destruction becomes too cheap. So the fact that lots of global powers have agreed that chemical weapons should be banned comes from, you can understand that as they're not liking low capital cost projects that change geopolitical the geopolitical situation. I think a lot, governments are still working out how to, but I think you see a lot of interest in governments about regulating cryptocurrencies. That's by and large not something I support, but they are working out how to do it because they see it as a threat to their monetary control. And that despite the fact that technology tries to push forward in contexts including cryptocurrency. With people transacting freely, some things can go wrong, but maybe nothing horrible can go wrong, and yet governments still find themselves with a tremendous interest in trying to regulate it. So I could imagine that would be even if we're all thinking sanely about this, governments could take an even harder line on AI.
Now, artificial intelligence, the technology, it's doing really good. It's creating real world benefits across different verticals. I mean, with the paper, obviously it kind of says that we need to create agents which are safety first, but this is really way out in the future. This is possibly maybe 30 years down the line, maybe before, maybe later. This is speculation because we don't really know. We are at ANI. But could you kind of address the positives of AI at this point in time? I mean, which are the areas according to you where it's creating great value to society?
There are lots of immensely valuable AI projects that exist today. And that if a government used too blunt a tool to try to ensure that AI was made, that really dangerous AI was not made, they might severely cripple the economy they might severely cripple their economy. I think there may be ways to draw lines around the safe and valuable projects versus the unsafe ones. But you asked me to name some of the valuable forms of AI today. I think the most valuable piece of technology that I can think of is a self-driving car technology. It already would be producing immense value if not for very stringent regulations. But as it gets better and is able to meet the regulatory hurdles, it will start to, as a matter of fact, produce the value that it's already capable of. So that's one area, I think. We're just beginning to see maybe some economically valuable applications of image generation. Image generation is just getting to the point where it's maybe economically viable. I think that in medical imaging, some diagnostic assistance done by AI has been very valuable. I haven't looked at the numbers there, but I assume there's lots of value there.
So Michael, somebody who's been vested in the space, when do you think hypothetically we will have artificial general intelligence, and what would be the approach? You mentioned reinforcement learning.
I don't know. You'd hope that when you become more aware about the latest events of the field, you'd start to make better guesses. But I can tell you from inside it, I don't know. And I don't think anyone really knows. It could be 5 years, it could be 100. What form would it look like? Well, I suspect the first systems that do really impressive things at a human level will mostly be imitations of a human. We're already starting to see some relatively impressive imitations of human text generation. If we end up creating agents that are much more advanced than humans, I would expect something like reinforcement learning to be the design.
Right. Most of the, the agents, when we talk about artificial general intelligence, we assume that this agents would have human level intellect, and you mentioned, there's two ways approach to it, feeding it a lot of data through supervised learning and through these reinforcement learning, the other approach. Now, tell me that, we humans have something special, which kind of adds that little spark with that intelligence, the consciousness, do you think that is it possible for machines to eventually, or this artificial general intelligence that we talk about, would it be conscious?
Consciousness, in addition to being great, is useful for us accomplishing our goals. Our ability to focus on one thing at a time and think it through, basically having a train of thought about what's going on to direct our attention, is very helpful for planning in the world. And it certainly seems possible to me that the reinforcement learning agents we might actually make would use similar sorts of computation that involve something that looks a lot like a stream of consciousness to help navigate the world. It's also plausible to me that it would have so much computational resources that it wouldn't need to really be so thrifty with where it directs its attention, which is maybe a key part of consciousness. I should have prefaced this by saying that I am not an expert in the philosophy of mind or in terms of what sorts of computations we could expect to produce consciousness. And so I'm speculating here. And also, the question about whether advanced AI would be conscious or how it would experience the world is quite separate from the question of whether it would be competent at achieving its goals and how it might go about achieving those goals. So an ability of a very advanced agent to be instrumentally rational, to try to figure out what to accomplish to best achieve its goals, is in principle totally separate from the question of whether it would be conscious.
Right. The reason I asked that was because if we are to create these artificial general intelligence, and if we are conscious, self-aware being, we have something called as empathy, and we empathize. Even like my wife does not eat non-veg, because she cares about every So I'm just kind of like digressing a little bit. Would that play a role in AGI thinking a little bit more for the humanity, and would not go towards just achieving its reward and just killing humanity? Just, I mean, it's just a weird question again.
Unfortunately not. If you can look closely enough at its code to see what criteria it has for selecting its actions. And for a reinforcement learner, the criteria for selecting an action is based on the expectation of how much reward it would expect to accrue from taking that action. Sometimes when people are worrying about future AI, they worry about, okay, well, what if it breaks the rules of the code that we've set for it? And that's not likely. If code doesn't just break itself, code does exactly what you told it to. The worry is that we have no way of telling it to do what we actually want it to do, and we'd end up telling it to do something we don't want it to actually do. So what an advanced reinforcement learner would actually do is evaluate the expected reward from a bunch of different actions and then select the action that maximizes it. It might have an understanding of us. It might understand how to empathize if it wants to mimic empathetic behavior. But at the end of the day, what determines which action it selects is how much reward it can expect to accrue from that action.
Right. So you mentioned that you are working or thinking in the lines of building AGI which is safe. Could you talk about your work research in that area?
Yeah. I mentioned some work about a reinforcement learning like agent that entertains multiple hypotheses about where reward comes from, and then acts in a way to make sure that it's getting reward according to all of those hypotheses. So as long as it has one hypothesis that reward just comes from doing what we wanted it to do, it'll make sure, in addition to all the other stuff, that it does what we wanted it to do. And so that's called a pessimistic reinforcement learner. And it's pessimistic because if there are different models that say, this course of action is good, this course of action is bad, one model says this course of action is good, but another model says that course of action is bad, it'll round that off to saying, oh, that's bad because not all the models are happy. And so then it looks for a different strategy. So that's one approach I've done some work on. And I'm more optimistic that such a thing would not try to take over the world. Another approach that I've looked into is trying to design an agent that only cares about a very short window of time. So it's not trying to, ensure that it's getting maximal reward for the next 100 years. It's trying to make sure that it's getting maximal reward for the next hour. And you could imagine you might be able to build an environment for it where it can't affect the outside world within an hour. So maybe it's talking with a person inside a room and neither of them can leave for an hour, and neither of them can communicate any information outside that room for an hour. And so then for the duration of time that it cares about, it can't affect the outside world, and so it wouldn't have any interest in shaping the outside world for its own purposes.
Thank you for taking time and being part of the podcast. There's some crazy, exciting, scary things happening, in the space of AI and all other tech space. And I guess we, the lay people, depend upon people such as yourself to think in the longer run, and think in the, the lines of, keeping humanity safe, because there is and always will be a camp of people who are run by the VCs who are constantly trying to drive innovation, technology without it being which is humanity first. I hope that people such as yourself, think more on the lines of building technology which in the long run is humanity first and safe for AI. Thank you once again for taking part and being part of the podcast. Would you like to kind of leave us with your kind of vision of the future, because you painted this report with your colleague and Marcus Hutter? How scared should be, and what's the world that you see in possibly another 30 years time?
Look, I think we should be concerned. I think some of the headlines that people might have seen might be exaggerating the concern a little bit, but I do think we should be concerned. I think it's possible that I think it's certainly possible we could navigate to a future that avoids this. If listeners are concerned and interested in the technical side of this and want to do some more thinking about this, I'd love to direct them to, they can look at some of my work on my website, which is michael-k-cohen.com. They could read Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, or Stuart Russell's book, Human Compatible. Those would be good resources for them to look into. And, what does the future look like? I wish I knew.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.